with Outdoors on the Cheap, and today I'm going to do a video where I'm pitting the axe against the machete in the northern forest context. And what I'm going to have these two tools doing is felling, limbing, and splitting, just to see which is better. I'm pretty sure I know how the outcome is going to be, but the reason I'm doing this video is for the sake of people that I think, especially younger people, especially younger men perhaps, they see the machete and you feel it in your hand and it just feels like the thing you want to bring with you. I mean, both of these tools weigh about the same. This little axe might weigh a little bit more. This is like a 1 pound head, and it's not the shortest handle you can get. I'd say this is like a, what would you call that, 16-inch handle, so not like, it's longer than a hatchet. A hatchet would end about here, right? You got a little bit more, an extra 6 inches than a hatchet, a little bit more useful handle. Okay, but both of these are inexpensive. I got this at a hardware store. I got this in an Army Navy surplus store. We're talking 20 bucks for these two things. Okay, so nothing here is special, nothing here is high end. And what I'm going to do in this video is just pit them against each other in terms of felling, limbing, and splitting. For the felling and limbing, I'm going to use these two spruce trees, because in the northern forest, at least in the context where I am here in Nova Scotia, Canada, the spruce tree is the thing you're going to come across the most. And it also behaves in a way, when you're trying to cut it, when you're trying to split it, very different than the hardwood tree or the tropical tree. I don't think it's an accident that when you see people in the tropics, they tend to be using the machete. And as you go further north and it gets colder and colder, you see people using the axe. Right? I think both of these tools are useful in their own way, but this tool really comes into its own in the northern forest, especially in the winter when everything's frozen. And whereas this is perhaps more useful in the applications of the tropical forest or the warmer forest. I also notice when you look at different bushcraft type people, they tend to, the further south you go, the knives get bigger. Bowie knife, that sort of thing. And when you look at northern people, Inuit and stuff like that, there's relatively small knives because the knife really isn't useful for trees, right? The kinds of trees we have, the kinds of trees you, like when it's the winter, if you need to fall a tree, it's a dead tree and it's a big tree, and you need it for heat, for fire. And you're not going to be felling, you're just straight up, I'll tell you right now, you're not going to be felling a dead big tree using this. With a baton, painstakingly, yes, you could take down a big dead tree using a machete, I suppose. But if you've got a proper axe, an axe that, you know, if you have your hand cupped underneath it, the handle comes up to your armpit, you can take down just about any tree in enough time, right? Relatively comfortable, relatively efficiently. And we're not going to talk about saws and their relative milage. We're just going to keep it simple to these two things. So without any further to do, and just to get started here, let's go to work here. So I'm going to start off first with the machete. Okay, so I'm going to be at my freshest and at my strongest. And I got two trees here. This one's actually slightly shorter than the other one, so I'm going to give the machete the advantage with that too. Okay, so I'm going to take the tree down. It's a relatively small tree, okay? But just for the sake of example, fell and limb these two trees, starting with the machete. All right, so I'm just going to move this guy out of the way. All right. Now, usually with a tree like this, you want to get the branches out of the way, give it a bit of a tip, get your feet out of the way. Okay, so we're through the tree. When you're limbing a tree, you want to take the thing upside down. And contrary to popular belief, you think you want to use the end of the blade, but actually you get a lot more out of the blade if you're sort of using the part down closer to your hand. Just the physics of it. So, I mean, this is a pretty effortless task for a small tree like this. Right, so I mean, that's pretty easy with the machete. With the axe, slightly bigger tree, right? Still, I don't think got much of an issue here in terms of filling. I'm gonna get this off without losing a hand here. Here we go. Now the axe, very similar with the small tree. The machete actually might be a little bit faster, to tell you the truth. But with the small tree, I'd say these two are roughly equivalent to one another. Okay, so when it comes to filling and limbing, something like this, this is like 1.5 inches. Both will work, even with the spruce, which are, in my opinion, harder to fell and harder to split than hardwoods in a lot of ways. Let's go look at something a little more substantial, okay? Kind of thing you'd actually want to fall in the winter in a northern forest. That is to say, a tree that you need for fire. You can't push down. Normally, out here, if you don't have a big axe or a big saw, and you need to make a fire for heat, you got to find a dead standing tree, because those are the ones that are dry, and it's got to be rotten enough for you to push it over, just using your strength, but not so rotten that it still isn't good firewood. And you can find those in the forest sometimes, and sometimes you can't. Anyway, here's a good firewood tree over here. Let's go try to take it down with a machete. All right, so let's put some of this stuff out of the way here. Here's a tree that I suppose one could say is a decent firewood tree. It's a dead standing, partly rotten spruce tree, the kind of thing you'd normally use for fire in a forest like this. I'm pretty sure I could push this over just using brute strength, but let's go at it with a machete, and let's just believe me when I tell you this machete is sharp as all get out, okay? And let's try to take this thing down. I gotta make sure my foot's out of the way for my swing. You know, when you're using a machete to take down a tree, basically you don't want to be chopping any higher than that, right? Because you can start going higher and you're going to be into your body. When you're down low like this, it's going to hit the ground. It's not going to take you out. I'm going to go two-handed here. It's definitely working. And I'm using the chopping part, right? I don't want to use this part. Now I'm using this part because I'm getting more force here, okay? More weight. It's sort of designed like that. And there's different machete designs. But, it will work. It doesn't really want to. Alright, so we got that down. It doesn't behave like an axe, let's put it that way. It doesn't want to bite into it the same way. Because of the physics of the machete, it's built differently, right? All the force isn't concentrated into the head the way an axe is. But it does work with something, this is relatively small. This is, let's say, 3.5 to 4 inches thick, right? But it's doable. Let's do one like this with an axe. Okay, so here we got a tree that's roughly equivalent, maybe a little bit more rotten. We'll see how she comes down. Anyway, let's get into her here with the axe. With the axe, you can just, this is really good solid wood here, but you can just get into it. It's gonna fall on the camera. Oh yeah. Anyway, with the axe, so this tree had sound wood. You just have the feeling of power, the feeling that all of the energy in the tool is being transferred into the wood. I don't know that this tree came down any faster or any slower. I have to figure these things out when I'm editing it. But certainly using the tool on the tree, you could feel that immediately on impact, all the energy is going from the axe to the wood. With a machete, when you hit the tree with the machete, you can feel it resisting in your hand. Some of the energy is going into your wrist and into your body, and the machete is vibrating along its length. So basically, you're building up a certain amount of energy, but it's not all being transferred into the edge, into the wood. A lot of that energy is being dissipated back along the tool, back into your body, into your wrist. The level of fatigue you would experience using the machete to fell tree after tree after tree would be greater than that with an axe. Now, yes, with the machete you can use a baton and some things like that. But, you know, while the guy with the machete is frigging around with the baton, the guy with the axe is just chewing his way through the forest. So I have to give, I mean, I could do 100 trees and time the whole thing and so on and so forth. But, I mean, honestly, for this sort of action, when I was in my 20s, I bought that machete. And I used it every chance I got because I thought, hey, machetes are cool. And then over time, I just found myself using it less and less and less and less and less. And that is because in the context of a northern boreal type forest, you know, here I live in Nova Scotia. I don't know if we're technically a boreal forest, but there's parts of the province that certainly fall into that category, and there's other parts that are more temperate. It really depends on where you live. Basically a spruce for an evergreen forest with some maple, some birch, more birch than maple, right? And you know, everything else is rare. And actually this part of the province, we don't have hardly any poplars at all. Other parts of the provinces, we do, of this province, Nova Scotia, we do have poplar, but around here you never see it in this forest anyway. It's basically spruce, fir, hemlock, pine, and then but primarily spruce and fir sort of thing. And then you've got your maple and your birch, and I mean, basically 90% of the hardwood trees you see are maple and birch. In terms of big trees, of course, there's alders everywhere, right? But that's what you see. Anyway, that's felling and limbing. Okay, I could do more, but I don't think there's a point. If you've used both a lot, at least in the context I'm speaking of, a sort of northern forest with the sort of ecology I have here, the axe wins. Let's split some stuff. Let's see how that works. All right, splitting. So, you know, splitting wood is considered to be an essential task for a bushcraft tool, and both the machete and the hatchet or the axe can split wood. I don't know how utterly essential it is to survival. I mean, I suppose it can be in certain instances. I mean, anything you can do with an axe, you can do with a properly made wedge, I suppose. But, you know, I can tell you as a person who's spent, you know, a good amount of time sort of roughing it in the woods, kind of like semi-living off the land. I've never been in a pure survival situation where I have nothing and I'm just trying to get by for an extended period of time like those people on alone. But I have had trips where I basically forced myself out into the elements, minimized my gear, and just tried to get by, you know, skipping meals and just trying to get by. And I can tell you, when you're in that situation, you don't spend a lot of time frigging around splitting wood. You know, anytime when you need to make a fire, you're basically pulling twigs off of trees if you need small stuff, and you're getting branches off of trees if you need bigger stuff, and you're smashing up dead trees if you need bigger stuff than that. You know, maybe you'll fell a large dead standing tree if it looks really good and you can't find anything else. You know, I suppose if you're in a situation where there was no branches anywhere, and the only thing there was to make a fire with was nice, dry, dead standing trees with no branches, then yeah, you'd have to fell that and split it. I had never been in a forest like that in my life. So, you know, most of the time if I'm splitting wood, I'm on a fishing trip and I'm sitting around a campfire at the end of the day in relative comfort, and I'm just playing with my tools, okay? But anyway, suffice it to say, I do recognize splitting wood as a sort of an essential bushcrafting exercise. Now, let's start with the machete. And I guess the temperature today is like -10 Celsius, okay? So things should split relatively easily. Now, this is a hard piece of wood to split. It is a dead birch tree. You can see that this is something you would use for firewood. Let's say it's all there, somehow, for some reason, that was all there is. That's not the case here. I mean, there's perfectly good kindling everywhere. I could just break it off the trees and there's birch bark everywhere. But anyway, let's say. So the outer ½ inch or centimeter is rotten. The center core is good wood. So I'm going to try to split this right down the middle, okay, just to make it as hard as possible. Now, I mean, I should have a longer piece of wood for this, but I'm just going to use what I've got here. it's kind of hard to split wood in a situation like this safely. I mean, if you put it like this and you start going like this, right, it's very risky to your hands. And the worst injuries I've ever had with axes have been from doing that. So it's a lot safer just to put the whatever the tool is over the thing, get it going like that, right, and then come onto it. Look at this. Look how the machete is bending with the grain of that wood and is becoming bound up. It's still splitting, and I'm sure if I straighten it, wow, does not want to go. So splitting it that way, it doesn't want to do it. Really, to split wood with a machete, I'm going to use the other piece of wood I've got to split. You need a baton, right? Something to act like a baton. And even then, boy, she doesn't. She does not want to go. Kind of knotty, you know, wood that exists in the northern forest. It does not cooperate with splitting. It just does not work well with a machete. It's not impossible, but it's not easy. Right? By contrast, let's try the axe. I think you know how this is going to go. With the axe, you sort of anchor the point in the base of the wood. Oops. Get in there. Oh, better. Get her squared up. Because the axe is a wedge, right? It just wants to split things, okay? You know, that's, the axe is a wedge. It's built for splitting, right? The machete is I suppose a micro wedge, but it doesn't work nearly as efficiently as the axe. The axe is just, you know, asking for material to split. Okay, so yes, if I was in a forest and there was only like one tree and I had to split it up and make feather sticks and all that sort of stuff to make a fire, I would definitely want to have one of these as opposed to one of these. All right, so felling, limbing, splitting. For, you know, smaller trees, I see these two as relatively equivalent. If anything, this might be a bit more nimble for smaller trees, like if you're going to make ski shoes, which is kind of like a snowshoe made from, you know, smaller coniferous trees like this, 6 foot high, you know, sort of Christmas tree, right? As soon as you get bigger with the tree, once you get into 3 inches, 4 inches, 5 inches, this thing starts becoming impossible to use or labor intensive to use. And really, if you're going to try to take down a tree any bigger than 3 or 4 inches in diameter, you're going to have to start batoning something like this to make it work properly. Okay, and you're just not getting, so now you've got a tool that weighs, let's say, 2 pounds or 1.5 pounds, and really none of that weight is going into the blow that's hitting the tree. The only force is being applied by your baton, right? By contrast, you got a 1.25 pound head on a hatchet, or a 1.5 pound, or 1 3/4, or 2 pound, or 2 2.25 pound head in an axe. When you're swinging that into a tree, all of that weight and all the force you're building by, you know, force equals mass times acceleration, all the force that you're building by swinging that in an arc, it's all going right into the tree, right on the top of that crescent-shaped arc, which becomes a wedge, right? So you're just getting so much more of the energy in your body into that tree. Whereas when you're using something like this, you're doing a lot of work. Not a lot of that work is going into the tree, so you have to do more work. And you've got the thing vibrating and doing all this sort of stuff, which builds fatigue in your joints, in your wrist, in your hands, and so on and so forth. You know, if you're young and you're full of energy and you're invincible, that might not matter, but, you know, depending on how in shape you are, what your grip strength is, and all that sort of stuff, this is a fatiguing tool to use if you're doing a lot of stuff, unless you're, you know, doing relatively light work like limbing trees, which this is actually not so bad for limbing trees. And that's smaller limbs. Once you get into larger trees, if we took down a tree, you know, a substantial tree, let's say, you know, 5 6 inches in diameter, goes up 30 feet or more. And if we managed to baton that down with this, we couldn't just blow the limbs off like I did with that little Christmas tree. Each of those limbs would have to be batoned off with this thing. Whereas with this baby, we just blow them off. This thing has so much force that we can actually limb the tree with the back. Look, here's a dead tree over here. I'll just show you easily. Because the axe, all the weight is in the head. Limbing, we don't even need the blade. We actually get to save our blade when we're limbing. Right? We can limb a tree fast using the hammer. We save the edge, right? And it takes no time at all, right? The machete, you'd use the back of the machete, but it would not do it as readily. Let's put it that way. Let's see a tree around here I can do this with. One over here, just for example's sake. Here's a good example of what I'm talking about. We got a nice big, I think this is a fir tree, and it's got, you know, really nice dry stuff underneath. I mean, sure, some of these we can break off with our hands, right? But let's say we were going to try to limb it using an axe or a machete. Right, the axe just flows through everything, no problem, right? The machete, sure we could, I mean, never swing up like this. The machete, we can use the blade, but when you're limbing a tree and you use the blade, usually that junction is very, very brittle and very, very hard, and you can actually nick. And if you're using extremely expensive top quality steel, I suppose that's indestructible, but it really depends on what the steel's made of. This is just like spring steel from a car, I'm guessing. So normally you want to put the thing around and use the back, right? But you can see how that, it'll work, but here's a substantial one over here. It just does not want to go, right? If I go up there, I can just break it off from up there. And it's actually vibrating the heck out of my hands, right? Now I can start cutting at it with the edge if I want to risk my edge, right? But look at the work I'm doing, and it's not coming down. Whereas with my axe, right, using it backwards, comes right off, right? Here's another one over here, right? We try to take this with the machete, right? You can tell I'm coming onto it. It's vibrating the heck out of my hand. It's not coming down. With the axe, it's off. All right, so with the limbing exercise, these two are only equivalent when you're using a small tree, something thin, something soft, something weak, something that's easy to go through. As things get bigger and harder, this becomes less and less useful, and this really comes into its own. So with the small wimpy stuff, they're about equivalent. This might be a slight edge. But when you're in the northern forest, especially in the winter, it's not the thin wimpy stuff you're looking for. The important stuff is the big heavy stuff, because it's fire, shelter, lean-to, log lean-tos and stuff like that. It's the big stuff that you need to stay alive, to make the big fire, to get warm, and all that sort of stuff, right? So this thing becomes less and less useful. So long story short, in the summer, this perhaps has a use, but really the use for the machete in the northern forest, in my opinion, is recreational. It's really, there's a handful of applications. If you're making a trail through a particular part of a forest and there's a lot of branches in the way, and they're relatively thin branches and you're just sort of clearing them out, there are instances where this tool can be useful. But if you're trying to take trees over, you're trying to take anything with size, you're trying to limb anything with size, and you're trying to split anything that needs to be split, especially if you're in a situation where everything's wet and the only dry wood is the stuff in the middle. Sure, with a baton you can split using a machete. You can also split using a baton and an axe, but you can also split without a baton using an axe. And with the axe you can build up incredible force by swinging it, right? Which with the machete, the swinging it doesn't confer the same advantage. You just don't build up energy when you swing a machete in the same way you build up energy when you swing an axe. Right? With one of these, I can go through the hood of your car. I can go through the door of your car. Can't do that with this. Right? more energy, more force. Anyway, I'm sure there's going to be people that disagree and everybody has their own opinions, but again, I'm talking about the northern forest, and especially in the winter with the kind of ecology that exists in the northern forest. My conclusion, and I mean, I'm just doing this video to summarize the experience I've had over the course of, I'm 49 years old and I've been doing this stuff all of my adult life. This is just not a useful tool for the northern forest as a general all-around tool. If I had to bring one thing, I'm not bringing that, I'm bringing this, right? And preferably something where the length, I mean, I just brought this here so it would be roughly equivalent to the machete, that is to say a one-handed tool. I would actually bring something with a longer handle and a little more weight in the head to be an all-around tool. And I've got a video I show where I fell a tree almost as thick as this, make a canoe paddle out of it just using an axe. Good luck doing that with a machete in the northern forest. And I think it was a spruce tree or a fir tree. Anyway, give me your comments. Let me know what you think. If you've come to the same conclusion, or if you vehemently disagree and have an argument why, maybe I'll do a follow-up video speaking to any comments that come up in that section. So I hope you found that interesting. If you did, please like, share, subscribe. Until next time, enjoy the outdoors on the cheap. Thanks for watching.